There is a liquid that forms naturally when salt and water meet vegetables in an enclosed container. It requires no heat, no factory, no sealed can, no refrigeration. It has been preserving food since ancient Egypt. Roman soldiers carried it on campaigns. Korean farmers stored it in clay pots through winter. The liquid it produces feeds soil bacteria when applied to garden beds. It costs almost nothing to make. It generates itself from kitchen scraps. And the $1.2 trillion food packaging industry, which was built on the assumption that you need their product to keep food from spoiling, has been quietly replacing this liquid with cans, pouches, and plastic jars for 70 years. The liquid was never dangerous. It was never inadequate. It just could not be sold at a markup. The fear of bacteria replaced the knowledge of which bacteria to trust, and once that knowledge was gone from kitchens, it needed to be bought back in a bottle with a label and a price tag. Subscribe and hit the bell. The next story opens soon. 3,000 years ago, an Egyptian food store was not a refrigerated room. It was a clay vessel. Vegetables packed in salt water. The salt created an environment where one specific type of bacteria could survive and every harmful type could not. That bacteria, which exists naturally on the surface of every vegetable grown in soil, consumed the sugars in the vegetables and converted them into lactic acid. The lactic acid preserved everything it touched. The process required no technology, no fire, no sealing mechanism, no factory. Just salt, water, vegetables, and a clay pot left in a cool location. The liquid that formed in that pot was not waste, it was medicine. Egyptian physicians used it to treat digestive complaints. Roman soldiers drank it to maintain gut health on campaigns. The same liquid poured onto farmland improved soil quality because it introduced billions of the same bacteria into the earth that plants had been growing in for millions of years. This is lactofermentation, brine, the liquid produced when salt meets vegetable matter in an oxygen-free environment, and the naturally occurring lactobacillus bacteria on the vegetable surface take over. Lactobacillus is everywhere. On every carrot you have ever peeled, on every cabbage leaf you have ever stripped, on every cucumber you have ever sliced, the bacteria is already there. The salt removes its competition. Left to work, it transforms ordinary vegetables into preserved food that does not need refrigeration and does not need a factory and does not need a use-by date. Roman legions carried garum, the name most people do not recognize for something every Roman ate daily. Garum was fermented fish sauce, made by layering fish and salt in amphorae and leaving them in the sun for months. The liquid that separated from the fermenting fish was garum. It lasted for years without refrigeration. It traveled with the Roman army across 3 continents. It was used as seasoning, as medicine, and as a trading commodity. Roman merchants exported it across the Mediterranean the way modern companies export condiments. Recipes from ancient Rome reference it the way modern recipes reference soy sauce. It was not exotic. It was everyday. It was the fermented liquid that kept a civilization fed on the move. By the time the Korean peninsula was developing its culinary traditions 2,000 years ago, the same principle had been refined into kimchi, vegetables packed in salt, left to ferment. The liquid that formed was called kimchi brine, and it was treated as a resource in its own right. Korean farming communities poured it into their vegetable plots. They understood intuitively that the liquid from a fermentation pot was good for growing things. The science to explain why would not arrive for another 1,800 years. The practice did not need the science. The crops grew better. The knowledge survived. In Japan, the same process produced miso and soy sauce. The liquid that separated from fermenting soybeans was soy sauce, not manufactured, not synthesized, produced by the same bacterial process in wooden barrels over months of patient fermentation. Traditional Japanese soy sauce aged in cedar barrels took up to 2 years to develop its full flavor profile. The liquid at the end was not just seasoning, it was the product of 2 years of microbial work on a basic grain and salt mixture. Every drop contained the history of the barrel. The flavor could not be faked and could not be rushed, so the industry made a faster synthetic version, put it in plastic bottles, and called it the same thing: German sauerkraut, Japanese miso and sake, Indian lacto-fermented chutneys, Persian torshi. The pattern repeats across every major civilization that developed before mechanical refrigeration existed. Everywhere humans needed to preserve food for winter, for drought, for military campaigns. For ocean voyages, they discovered the same process. Salt plus vegetable plus time equals a stable, nutritious, preserved food that does not spoil and a liquid byproduct that feeds soil and supports health. Different cultures, different ingredients, different names, same biological process, same liquid, same result. The liquid moved with humanity. When sailors needed to prevent scurvy on long voyages, they carried lacto-fermented sauerkraut. James Cook's voyages in the 1770s brought barrels of sauerkraut, specifically because the lactic acid and vitamin C content prevented the gum disease and weakness that had killed sailors on previous expeditions. Cook did not know why it worked. He observed that sailors who ate it stayed healthy. He made it mandatory. The liquid preserved the food, and the food preserved the crew. A clay pot and salt, solving the problem that killed sailors for centuries before anyone understood bacteria. Here is the chemistry. Simple enough that it has been practiced for 3,000 years without anyone needing to understand it. Every vegetable that comes out of the ground is covered in millions of microorganisms. Most of them are neutral. Some are harmful. A small proportion are lactobacillus bacteria. This bacteria is everywhere. It wants to eat sugar. Left in the open air, it competes with other bacteria and does not dominate. Place it in a salt solution with no access to oxygen, and the competitive landscape changes completely. Salt water, at the right concentration, kills most bacteria. Lactobacillus is salt tolerant. It survives. Its competition does not. In the absence of competition, lactobacillus multiplies and gets to work. It eats the sugars in the vegetable. It converts those sugars into lactic acid. Lactic acid makes the environment acidic. The acidic environment kills any remaining harmful bacteria and preserves the vegetable tissue against decomposition. The process is self-completing. The bacteria creates the conditions that protect the food and then protects the food indefinitely as long as the vegetables remain submerged in the acidic brine. No heat needed. Heat would kill the bacteria, which is why canned food is sterile but also lifeless. No factory needed. No sealed container with a vacuum. No preservatives added from a chemical plant. The preservative is lactic acid. The fermentation vessel is any clean container with a lid. The equipment cost is zero. The ongoing cost is salt, approximately 1 tablespoon per cup of water. Now here is what the brine does to soil. This is the part the packaging industry found most threatening. Soil is a living system. Every gram of healthy soil contains billions of microorganisms, bacteria that break down organic matter, fungi that form networks between plant roots, protozoa that consume bacteria and release nutrients in plant-available form. The entire system works because of microbial diversity and abundance. When you pour fermentation brine onto garden soil, you are adding a concentrated dose of viable lactobacillus bacteria and lactic acid to that system. The bacteria take up residence. They begin breaking down organic matter that was previously unavailable to plants. They improve the soil structure by producing polysaccharides that bind soil particles together. They create channels that improve drainage and aeration. Korean farmers who maintained kimchi as a central food practice understood this for centuries. The brine from the fermentation pot went into the vegetable patch. Crops grown in regularly amended soil showed better yield and resilience to disease than crops grown without it. The scientific explanation would come later. The practice preceded the explanation by 2,000 years. Research published in the Korean Journal of Soil Science and Fertilizer in 2011 measured the microbial populations in garden plots amended with fermentation. Brine against controlled plots without amendment. The amended plots showed microbial populations 3 to 5 times higher than the controlled plots after 8 weeks. Higher microbial populations correlate with improved nutrient cycling and improved crop yields. The study was published. It received no coverage outside specialist agricultural circles. The food packaging industry did not reference it. So what replaced this liquid, and why? In 1810, a French inventor named Nicolas Appert developed a method of preserving food by sealing it in glass jars and heating it in boiling water. He received a 12,000 franc prize from Napoleon's government for solving the problem of feeding armies in the field. His method worked. Food sealed and heated in jars was shelf-stable for months. The method became canning. The canning industry became a global business. The difference between Appert's canning and lactofermentation is fundamental. Canning kills all bacteria through heat. The food is sterile and preserved by the absence of life. Lactofermentation preserves food through a managed abundance of one specific bacterial strain. Canning requires capital equipment, heat sources, and sealed containers manufactured to precise tolerances. Lactofermentation requires a clay pot and salt. Industrial capital can own a canning facility. Industrial capital cannot own the salt on your shelf and the lactobacillus on your cabbage. The shift happened over decades. The post-World War II expansion of refrigeration into American homes changed the food preservation equation. A refrigerator preserved fresh food without any microbial process. Plastic packaging appeared in the 1950s and extended shelf life of processed products. The food processing industry built supply chains around canned, frozen, and packaged goods. The knowledge of lactofermentation was not banned. It was not declared dangerous. It was simply no longer taught. Home economics programs that once taught fermentation alongside cooking basics quietly dropped the subject. Agricultural extension offices that had promoted fermentation as a food security practice for rural families shifted toward commercial preservation methods. Cookbooks written from the 1960s onward treated fermentation as an ethnic or artisanal practice, something that Korean grandmothers did, something that European peasants had done, not something for the modern American kitchen. The fear of bacteria completed the work that the packaging industry started. Pasteur's germ theory, which correctly identified bacteria as causes of disease, was applied indiscriminately to fermentation. If bacteria caused illness, all bacteria were threatening. The distinction between harmful bacteria, eliminated by salt water, and beneficial, lactobacillus that thrives in salt water, was lost in popular understanding. Parents worried about feeding fermented foods to children. The advice from doctors was cautious. The packaging industry offered a solution. Buy our product, it is sterile, it is safe, the bacteria are dead. The bacteria are dead. That is both the selling point and the problem. Dead bacteria do not improve your soil. Dead bacteria do not support your digestive microbiome. Dead bacteria do not reduce the need for synthetic fertilizer. Dead bacteria do not preserve food without refrigeration. The canned pickle requires a refrigerator after opening. The lacto-fermented pickle in a crock does not. The difference is life versus sterility. Here is the number that the packaging industry did not want measured. A 2020 study published in the journal Frontiers in Microbiology compared the bacterial diversity in the gut microbiome of populations that regularly consumed lacto-fermented foods against populations that did not. The lacto-fermented food consumers showed measurably higher microbial diversity across every metric. Higher diversity correlates with better immune function, better digestive health, and lower inflammation markers. The study noted that the decline of fermented food consumption in Western diets tracked directly with the rise of industrial food packaging from the 1950s onward. One transition, one biological consequence, documented, published, not referenced in a single packaging industry communication. The packaging industry built a trillion-dollar business on the sterilized version. Here is how to make the brine. It takes 10 minutes. Take any hard vegetable, cabbage, cucumbers, carrots, radishes, cut them into pieces or shred them. Weigh them. For every kilogram of vegetable, use 20 grams of non-iodized salt. Iodized salt inhibits lactobacillus. Use sea salt, kosher salt, or pickling salt. Do not use iodized table salt. Mix the salt into the vegetable. Work it with your hands for 5 minutes. The salt draws moisture out of the vegetable cells. The vegetable will begin to soften and release liquid. After 5 minutes, pack the vegetables into a clean glass jar. Press down firmly. The liquid released from the vegetables should rise to cover them. If it does not cover them completely, make additional brine from 1 tablespoon of salt dissolved in 1 cup of water and add enough to submerge everything. Place a weight on top of the vegetables to keep them below the brine. A small jar filled with water works, a clean stone works. The vegetables must stay submerged. Any vegetable exposed to air above the brine surface will develop surface mold. The mold is harmless and can be skimmed off. The submerged vegetables will not mold. Cover the jar loosely with a cloth or a lid placed without tightening. The fermentation process produces carbon dioxide. A sealed lid will build pressure. Leave it at room temperature between 65 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Check it daily. Taste it after 3 days. It should be pleasantly sour. After 5 to 7 days, the sourness deepens. Move it to a cool location when it reaches the flavor you prefer. It will continue fermenting slowly in the cold, but will remain edible indefinitely. The brine in the jar at this point is the product that contains billions of viable lactobacillus bacteria per milliliter. It is acidic with lactic acid. It is full of enzymes produced during fermentation. To use it on your garden, dilute 1 tablespoon of brine per gallon of water. Water your vegetable beds with this solution once per month during the growing season. The bacteria introduced to the soil will establish and colonize the root zone. Over one growing season, measurable improvements in soil biological activity appear. Over multiple seasons, the soil structure improves. The kitchen scraps you would otherwise compost become the starter for the next batch. The brine from the previous batch can be used as a starter for the next fermentation, reducing the time required from 7 days to 2 or 3. The system compounds on itself. Each batch produces more brine. More brine improves the garden. A better garden produces more vegetables. More vegetables generate more fermentation material. The system compounds on itself. Each batch produces more brine. More brine improves the garden. A better garden produces more vegetables. More vegetables generate more fermentation material. The brine from the previous batch can also be used as a starter culture for the next fermentation, reducing the time required from 7 days to 2 or 3 because you are inoculating the new batch with billions of already active bacillus rather than waiting for the ambient bacteria on the vegetable surface to establish dominance. This is the closed loop that the packaging industry interrupted in 1950. The loop that Egyptian farmers ran for 3,000 years, that Roman legions depended on, that Korean farming communities maintained for 2 millennia. The loop that required no factory, no cold chain, no capital investment, and no recurring purchase. 1 tablespoon of salt per cup of water. A clean jar. The lactobacillus that is already on every vegetable in your kitchen. The bacteria does not need to be purchased. The process does not need to be licensed. The brine does not need to be shipped in a refrigerated truck. The $1.2 trillion packaging industry needs you to keep believing that it does. Subscribe and hit the bell. The next story opens soon.